Shalom Aleichem and welcome everyone. As we have the opportunity to prepare ourselves for Shabbat Parashat Teitzi, as we get closer and closer to Rosh Hashanah. This week's Parashat starts off Teitzi la milchama al oyevecha untano Adonai Elohecha beyadecha b'shavita shivyo. When you go out to war against your enemies, and Hashem your God will deliver him into your hand, and you will capture its captives. Chazal tell us, who is the enemy that is mentioned in this pasuk? The Chachamim tell us we're talking about the enemy that lies within, the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. Although serving Hashem comes with many challenges, it's important to know that for each challenge we overcome, we are rewarded immensely. We read this pasuk here in the month of Elul, a time that is specially made for Teshuvah. But this is the part that I think we must focus on. Even if a person loses the battle against the Yetzer Hara, he should not feel like a failure. The Sefer Divrei Binah quotes that in the heavens they consider how hard a person fought the Yetzer Hara before he succumbed to the Yetzer Hara. They look how difficult the battle was and to see if the person fought. Even if we feel that we are unable to withstand a test from the Yetzer Hara, we should never give up fighting, because the truth is we are rewarded for every step of the battle. It should be the will of Hashem that we win the battle. But the battle itself, to fight against the Yetzer Hara, that in itself already is a huge accomplishment. Rav Moshe of Korbin told the following parable to convey this vital lesson on how to defeat the Yetzer Hara. Two of the king's soldiers were sent to the battlefield to wage war against the enemy. One of the soldiers was quite smart, and the other soldier was lacking some intelligence. In the middle of one battle, the smarter of the two was wounded as a bullet tore into his arm. But he knew that he could not stop fighting the enemy and shooting at them. If he would stop defending himself, the next bullet might hit him in the heart, might hit him in the head. So he continued fighting, eventually defeating the enemy. The second soldier, the one not so smart, was also wounded in battle, but he lacked the good sense to make the same decision as his fellow soldier. When he got hit, instead he stopped fighting and took out his first aid kit to bandage his wound. Within moments, he was hit once more, but this time the bullet pierced his heart and he died immediately. Rav Moshe Korbin explains that this battle applies to the war we wage against the Yetzer Hara. If we are wounded in battle, the Yetzer Hara is getting to us. He's making us do things. We fall into the tests and we succumb to our evil inclination. We cannot afford to stop fighting. If we fall into a state of sadness and start licking our wounds, we'll have no chance to survive. For what chance does a person have if he stops learning and davening? Rav Mendel Futterfass, a great Baal Mechazik, told the following story. If a fellow is stuck in the mud and he wants to get out, he needs to fight his way through it. If he just stands there, he will sink further and further, and he'll never get out. But as long as he continues to put that one foot in front of the other, as slow as the progress may seem, he will eventually find his way to the end. He may fall into the mud. He may get dirty from it. He become filthy. But the only way he'll be able to cleanse himself if he gets out of the mud first. When a spider spins its web and another creature gets caught inside of it, the spider waits while it watches its prey fight and struggle to free itself from the trap. When it stops fighting, the spider attacks and destroys its prey. We must never give up, because as long as we continue to fight, the Yetzer Hara cannot completely get us. Although we may be dirty and wallowing in the mud, It may be shot from the Yetzer Hara. But as long as we continue to fight, we have a chance. We can never, ever stop fighting. Baruch Hashem, we're in the Yemei Elul, where Hashem gives us a special extra koach to fight the Yetzer Hara, to come out from it. And Be'ezras Hashem, we should be zocheh to completely win over the Yetzer Hara. In this week's parasha, for our second lesson, we have a pasuk that tells us about a certain group of people who are not allowed to join the Jewish community and to marry Jews. The pasuk tells us, and this is in Perek Chav Gimel, pasuk Dalid, Lo yavo Amoni uMoavi bekal Hashem. The Ammoni and the Moavi, they're not allowed to enter the Kal Hashem, even the 10th generation. Why? The next pasuk, in pasuk Hey, tells us the reason. Al devar asher lo kidmu etchem balechem uvamayim. Because they didn't come out with bread and water, but derech betzitchem b'Mitzrayim, when we were leaving from Mitzrayim. So the reason they're not allowed to join is because they didn't come out with bread and water. And then the pasuk says as a side note, and by the way, Shechar lechet Bil'am, they hired Bil'am to curse you. And that's what the pasuk says. I want to share with you an interesting story that actually happened many years ago on this parasha. It happened this week. And this week, right before Parashat Teitzi, there was a famous Maggid known as the Dubna Maggid, Rav Yaakov Krantz, Zecher Tzadik L'Bracha. He was a brilliant scholar, an amazing orator. He spoke eloquently. He illustrated his sermons with unique stories taken from human life. And he was able to illuminate difficult passages in the Torah and the Talmud. And he was able to answer numerous questions in halakha. He was a very public figure, and everyone knew him. But in those days, they didn't have, like we have today, ability to see photos and know who's who. People knew that existed a Dubna Maggid. And one day, the Dubna Maggid, without telling anyone, decided he wanted to go on a trip as a private citizen, and no one should know who he is. And so he traveled a whole day, not telling anyone he was leaving the city of Dubna. And he ended up in a small town with a sizable Jewish population. He went to the inn, and he found the owner, and he asked him for a room. The innkeeper was in a rush and told him, I'm leaving right now. I can't set you up. Come back in a few hours. He said, what's the rush about? Where's everyone going? I see everyone running around. The innkeeper said, don't you know? The Dubna Maggid is here in town, and he's speaking right now in the shul. Rav Yaakov was stunned. The real Dubna Maggid was stunned. He said, how can it be? He's thinking to himself, and how does anybody know that I'm here? And I'm giving a lecture? So he followed everyone who was hurrying in the direction of the main synagogue, and the Dubna Maggid sat in one of the seats. Together with the crowd, Rav Yaakov waited for the Dubna Maggid to make his appearance. And then, all of a sudden, a man with a long white beard walked up to the podium. The Maggid has arrived. Rav Yaakov was more amused than dismayed and decided to listen to the Maggid. At first, the man spoke well. He asked and answered questions with a logic and style reminiscent of professional preachers. But after a short time, it became clear to Rav Yaakov that this man was a bad actor. He began to ramble on. His points became jumbled, and his parables lacked clarity or any clear message. The more he spoke, Rav Yaakov realized that he had no idea what he was saying. So in the middle of this man's speech, the Dubna Maggid stood up and said, this man is an imposter. He is not from the city of Dubna, and he's definitely not a Maggid. If it's the Dubna Magid you were looking for, I am the Dubna Magid. You can imagine the chaos and commotion that broke out in the shul. People started to scream, how can you say that? The imposter screamed, people took his side. The other people took the real Dubna Magid side. And chaos broke out. Finally, the members of the community decided that each one will get a chance to present a sermon. And the one who presented the sermon well would be the one that would be crowned the Dubna Magid. The man with the long white beard went first. And no matter how much he tried, he could not impress the crowd. And then it was the real Dubna Magid's, the Rabbi Yaakov Krantz's, Zechasadik Bracha's turn. He looked over at the sea of faces and began. He said, in this week's parasha, in Parasha Ki Teitzi, the Torah tells us that Ammoni and Moavi cannot join the nation of Israel. Why? As we read, Shelo kidmu etchem b'lechem u'b'mayim, because they did not offer bread and water. Now I ask you, the Dubna Magid said, the fact that these very same nations tried to kill us and hired Bilam, the evil prophet, to curse and destroy us, is there not good enough reason to exclude them from joining our holy people? The Pasuk even talks about it. But the main reason the Pasuk gives is because they weren't kind to us. Why? The captivated crowd watched the real Dubna Magid with bated breath. The answer, my dear brothers, the Dubna Magid said, is that killing and murder is a consequence of one who lacks kindness in his heart. A person who is self-centered, a person who is egotistical, that he cannot help men, women, and children with a bit of food and water, is one who will eventually come to kill others. The Dubna Magid then added, the same goes for a person who craves honor and is willing to take the life and livelihood of another person. Identity fraud. That person has no business with good, fine Jewish people like yourselves. That man is an imposter, and if not expelled, can cause much more harm, pain, and sorrow. His words did the trick, and the phony Magid ran away, never to be seen again. You see, small actions have huge ramifications. A person who is lacking kindness can, chas shalom, end up killing and murdering. I saw another mashal where a new student came to yeshiva at the beginning of the zaman, beginning of the new yeshiva time period. He entered the Beit Midrash and he found the Rosh Yeshiva walking up and down the aisles of the Beit Midrash, picking up garbage and papers and taking it to the trash. This new student was shocked and surprised. He ran over to the Rosh Yeshiva and cried, Rebbe, let me do that for you. The Rosh Yeshiva turned to him in disbelief and said, absolutely not. The student was shocked and bewildered as he watched the great scholar carry off the trash. That Shabbat, the yeshiva, as they were praying, they gave this new student the kibud of hotza'ah v'hagva'ah, of taking out the Torah from the ark. He approached eagerly to remove the Torah and to walk with it. And all of a sudden he found the Rosh Yeshiva standing in front of him. And the Rosh Yeshiva said, let me do that for you. And the student's instincts prompted him to refuse. And in a flash, the student understood what true honor was all about. Because in Jewish thought, what is seen by many to be the lowliest endeavor is in fact one of the highest ideals. Serving another person, attending to their most basic needs, caring for the well-being of our fellow man. For this reason alone, Ammon and Moab were never allowed to join the ranks of the Jewish people. Basic human decency. If you don't have that, we can imagine where their characters will lead. Let's move on to our last lesson from this week's parasha. In this week's parasha, we are told about a mitzvah, ki yikach ish isha, if a man takes a woman. Talks about marriage. I want to start off by just covering a few points of marriage. The first point being that in order to get married, people have to know the number one thing that you can do to help yourself get married is to pray. Prayer is the number one endeavor a person needs to do in order to find his right zivug, in order to find their right partner. I don't know where it came to a certain point these days where young men, young women, all of a sudden know who exactly they're supposed to marry, how they're supposed to look, what their actual job is supposed to be. It's as if Hashem told them exactly who their zivug was and they're going only after one person. That's not the way it is. A person is supposed to daven and pray to Hashem, then Hashem leads him or leads her to the right person. There's a story that's told over. I got this new sefer called The Legend of Humility and Leadership, a biography of Mordechai Eliyahu, Zecher Tzadik L'Bracha, the Rishon LeZion, Sephardic chief rabbi of Israel. And in here he talks about where he was touched very much about learning how important prayer is. When he became a dayan in Beersheba in 1957, on his first day on the job, he saw a woman standing outside praying from a small Sefer Tehillim. And she remained outside all day. And every day he came for the next several days, she was standing in front of the Beit Din with the Tehillim and praying from it. But Mordechai Eliyahu was very interested to find out what she was doing there. And so he told the secretary to call her, and he wanted to talk to her. He asked her, why you stand outside the Beit Din all day and you're praying from a Tehillim? She said, I moved to Israel from Morocco. And they sent me to Beersheba. I asked where the local Beit Din was, and I told it was here. And so here I am. So Mordechai Eliyahu said, okay, I understand you found the Beit Din, but why are you praying in front of the Beit Din? She said, I'll tell you. I'm praying for my husband. My husband was a taxi driver in Morocco. A week after we married, at the end of Sheva Brachot, his taxi was completely destroyed in a terrible accident. He was killed. But his body was not recovered. And so I remained in Aguna. I couldn't marry because we had no body. I went to the rabbis in Casablanca to be declared a widow, but they said that without a body they could not know for certain he was dead. And when I came to Eretz Yisrael, I had faith that the rabbis in Eretz Yisrael could do what the rabbis in Morocco couldn't. So Mordechai Eliyahu said, okay, but why do you remain outside? Come into the court. Ask us. Plead your case. She said, plead to the Dayanim? I don't plead to Dayanim. I pray to Hashem. I don't pray to Dayanim. Rabbi Eliyahu immediately took up her case. He took all the papers, took all the information he can get, and he went to the Baba Sali, Rabbi Yisrael Abu Hatzera, in Netivot. The Baba Sali told him that his brother, the Baba Haki, Rabbi Yitzchak Abu Hatzera, who was a leading rabbi in the Israeli city of Ramla, knew everyone in Morocco and would definitely know the people involved in Jewish burials in Morocco. Rabbi Eliyahu traveled to Ramla to speak to the Baba Haki, who informed him that there were only 2 Jewish grave diggers in Morocco, and both of them now live in Israel. One lived in the south, in the southern town of Dimona, and the other one in Kiryat Ata, near the port city of Haifa. I lived in the south, Chacham Mordechai said. So I said, I'll go to Dimona. He went to the address, only to learn that the man's family was sitting Shiva for him. This gravedigger just died a few days prior. Rav Mordechai Eliyahu, though disappointed, went inside and stayed for Mincha. While there, waiting for Aravit, he shared some words of Torah and gave solace to the grieving family and friends. And he explained why he was there. Immediately, a man jumped up and said, I am the other gravedigger, and I know the story that you're talking about. I actually buried that taxi driver. Rabbi Eliyahu asked him to accompany him to visit other rabbis who questioned him and determined that his testimony was acceptable. Rabbi Eliyahu convened the Beit Din, and the woman was declared unchained and permitted to remarry. This is the power of prayer. Rabbi Eliyahu later said, both hers and mine. From that story, Rabbi Eliyahu then penned himself a prayer that he would say as a judge. Prayer is what makes the world go round. Prayer is what makes everything happen. A person needs to pray that it's Hashem that's going to help him. And Hashem will definitely help him. I want to talk a little bit more about the inyan of marriage. The Yalkut Shimoni asks why Hashem didn't create husband and wife as a pair from the start. They're supposed to be a pair. They're supposed to be ezer kinegdo, opposite each other, as a pair together in life. So why they have to go through this period of time called dating and trying to find each other, which can be very exhausting and frustrated and full with tension. And so the Midrash explains, Hashem saw that men would complain about their wives. Had each person been created together with a spouse, that spouse might be totally unappreciated. A person would think, if only I was single. Hashem creates each person alone and has him go through the process of seeking a mate so that he'll better appreciate marriage. In addition, the courting period, the dating period, enables one to plant seeds for successful marriage. Rav Pam would tell newlyweds, in order to have a successful marriage, the courtship must continue. To create happy marriages, we have to keep up dating. We have to be like when we were dating, even when the wedding is but a distant memory. I would like to end off with one more idea about marriage. And this comes from Rav Chaim Vital, Zecher Tzadik Lebracha, the student of the Arizal. Rav Chaim Vital says, and this is Rav Zilberstein, Rav Yitzchak Zilberstein in the Leilul Shabbat that brings this down. He says over here, many people make a huge mistake. Many people are willing to jump out of bed in the middle of the night to help a friend or even a stranger who's in crisis, but are not so eagerly ready to jump out of bed to help their wives or to take care of their children. They also must be extremely sensitive to the feelings of others outside their family while being inconsiderate the feeling and preferences of their family members. A person who does chesed for multitudes of people, lending money, visiting the sick, consoling mourners, bringing joy to Hatan and Kala, undoubtedly expects to receive rich reward in the next world for all of his good deeds. But he should know, however, that heaven is primarily concerned with the way he treats his wife. Rav Chaim Vital writes that if a person's midot are gauged solely by the way he treats his wife. If he was kind to his wife, he will be fortunate. But if he treated his wife unkindly, and he didn't help share her burden and help her, if he neglected her, this behavior will determine his fate in the next world. And none of the hesed that he does for others will be taken into account. And so with these thoughts on marriage, I think this has a lot of food for thought that we can definitely ponder on them and see how and what we can do to improve our marriages. And remember, marriage is a two-way street. It's a husband and a wife. Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, Zecher Tzadik Lebracha, writes in Emet LeYaakov that each one has to respect and help and take care of each other entirely, both the husband to the wife and the wife to the husband. And so, as the saying goes, it takes two to tango. Be'ezat Hashem, we should look at each other, see what we can do for the other, and not what the other can do for us. And Be'ezat Hashem, with these lessons that we learned, the lesson of fighting the Yetzer Hara, even if we're going to lose, but at least put up the fight. And even that fight will be rewarding to us. The lesson of making sure small acts of kindness happen, because that really defines a person. And if that's lacking, oy, what a horror it can be. And the lessons of marriage, of prayer, to find your wife, to find your spouse, prayers for shalom bayit, prayers for everything in life, for the children, for them now, for them in the future, for the grandchildren before they come, for everything. Prayer is the only way it's going to work. For the lesson of appreciation. And to help you appreciate, Rav Pam says, that's why you have your photo albums, your wedding album, your wedding videos, in order to go back and relive that simcha. And remember that in Shemaim, and it comes Rosh Hashanah, we're going to be sitting in Yom Hadin. They're going to judge our midot, both in the next world and here on this world, on how we treat our spouse. And Be'ezat Hashem, we should all be judged favorably and be able to improve our lives, our marriage, and everything that we do. And with this, Shabbat, we know, is the Mikor HaBeracha, is the source of all blessing. We should all be blessed with health, with wealth, with parnasah, with yeshuot, refuot, and be'ezras Hashem, our limit Torah should increase, and we should see the Geula, the Mashiach Tzidkenu, Meher B'Yameinu. Amen. Shabbat Shalom Lekulam.